Okay, there we are. All right, so thank you so much for attending our latest office hours session. And I'm so excited to be here with Denise Malone-Cash to be talking about workplace accommodations for neurodivergent professionals. Now, if you've been around for some previous office hour sessions we have covered this session once before with a different professional, but this is one of the most in-demand topics that I hear from neurodivergent professionals. So I'm so glad that I was able to bring on Denise to be able to share her expertise as, both an HR professional and as someone who works diligently in this space to advocate for neurodivergent professionals in the workplace. It just seems like a perfect fit. So here we are. I'm going to quickly introduce myself for anybody who doesn't know me. My name is Veronica, and I am the career coach behind Atypical Careers. I focus mainly on working with neurodivergent professionals and helping them build sustainable work lives, or as sustainable as we can make them in this crazy world of work that we live in. And so that's really a little bit about me. And today I will be taking on more of the host and moderator role, although I might be chiming in with some thoughts here and there. But we really do have the star of the show today, which is who is Denise Malone-Cash, and she is the founder at Inclusion by Design and the author of the Disclosure Workbook. And Denise, I'm so happy to have you here. Could you maybe introduce yourself a little bit more to us and tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right.
Oh, I'm not
Thank you,
hearing.
Veronica.
Oh,
Can
there
you
you
guys hear
are.
me now? Okay.
Yes,
All
I
right.
can hear you
Thank
now.
you. It's a pleasure to be here. I am a neurodivergent person myself. I am late diagnosed autistic with a PDA profile. I have spent 15 plus years in people leadership, HR, and employee relations. I have facilitated hundreds of accommodations requests. Last year when I was diagnosed and my disclosure journey didn't go so well, I decided to launch Inclusion by Design. I decided to write a book, and I decided to go back to school for a PhD in IO psychology so that I can incorporate neurodivergent safety in employee practices.
That's incredible. And so wonderful that we have somebody with your background, your expertise. And I'm sorry that disclosure story didn't go well, but I'm sure that a lot of people in this call and people watching really resonate with that, because honestly, pursuing accommodations, as simple as they may make it sound, it is actually it's a huge journey full of lots of pitfalls and traps and things that we don't really know what to look out for. And it can be incredibly overwhelming for neurodivergent folks. So I'm glad that we're going to be having this conversation today. Now, we're about to dive into the Q&A. We waste no time here. We do have a bunch of pre-submitted questions, which you will see appear on the screen. That being said, if you do have any questions live and you are here live and you would like to ask the question, feel free to drop it in the comments. And I'm going to be playing administrator back here. I'm going to try and address as many of them as possible. So feel free to pop it in there, and we will get to it as soon as we can. With that said, Denise, are you ready for the first question? How does that sound?
I am ready. Let's go.
Let's do it. Okay, let's start with the first question here, which says, what kind of accommodations can I ask for at my workplace in reference to autism, ADHD, and chronic pain? So it sounds like we're just looking for some of the most common, or the most or the most useful types of accommodations that could be possibly asked for. And so without knowing more about this individual, Denise, what would you recommend?
So I'm going to start with saying that it depends on your workplace, right? So all accommodations are not one size fit all. So someone who has chronic pain who sits at a desk job versus someone who has chronic pain who works in manufacturing. The same can be said for autism and ADHD. So it all depends on the role, the essential functions of your job, and what you need help with to perform the essential functions of your job. So what I see most often in autism and ADHD is meeting agendas at least 24 hours in advance, noise canceling headphones, and these things you guys probably have heard already. Remote work, task lists, adjusted lighting, as well as clear verbal communication and flexibility in communication. For chronic pain, there's ergonomic equipment, but again, it depends on what your role is. And for chronic pain, what your physician says, will help for the chronic pain. It's important to know that you can request any accommodation that helps you do your job better, as long as it doesn't cause an undue hardship on the employer. And that is in US, right? That's in the US. I'm not familiar with laws in Canada. As long as it doesn't cause an undue hardship on the employer, you can ask, in conjunction with your doctor, you can ask for whatever accommodation that you need to do the essential functions of your job.
Absolutely. And it's very important, again, to kind of know what the laws are in your region as well. What are your protections? What are your rights and things like that, which can be a bit overwhelming to start off with. But, I promise it is worth the effort to do. And, as Denise said, there is no blanket list of, appropriate accommodations for autistic people or ADHD people or anything, because we're all so different. We're all so varied in what we need and what works for us. So don't expect, accommodations to be like a one and done type thing. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to try things on for size and figure things out. And hopefully your employer will be willing to go along that journey with you. But we all know that the workplace isn't perfect. And, sometimes we can be disappointed with the kind of support that we get in the workplace, like Denise said about her previous experiences and everything. Sorry, I don't know why I said that, but so that was really fantastic. Why don't we move on to the next question here? So the next question says, how can I get my manager to take my accommodations seriously? Even though I've asked him to send my tasks and updates in writing, he always forgets or says, oh, I'll do it next time. And that sounds incredibly frustrating, because the manager should really be on top of this. It's really not your job to manage your manager. So I really feel for this individual. But Denise, what are your first thoughts about this question here?
Thank you. So once accommodation is approved, it becomes a formal and legal obligation on the employer. It's not a favor. It's not, oh, we just doing it because you asked for it. It's a legal obligation. If the manager is not following through, one, I would recommend start documenting everything. Two, I will follow up with HR. So I would document everything that the manager is not following HR. If you're comfortable, follow back up with the manager. But I know sometimes that can add to cognitive load, and sometimes we just don't have the capacity or the bandwidth to keep repeating ourselves and to keep following up. So I would go to HR, document everything, because not only is this just not following through with your accommodations, this is a medical necessity that you need. And so I always liken it to, if someone had a broken leg, right, and they had to use the elevator. If the elevator didn't work, the company would get on it to make the elevator work again, to repair that elevator. They wouldn't just say, oh, you can't come to work today, or oh, we just ignored it. They will repair that elevator. It's the same thing. Accommodation is an accommodation, and they have the responsibility, the legal obligation and the responsibility to follow through. If you follow HR and nothing else is happening, I would reach out to any third party legal entity, the EEOC, any employee rights attorneys, or anything around employee rights in your municipality.
That's great advice there. And I would also say, accommodations, we often kind of think of accommodations as a favor that employers do for us. That's one of the pitfalls of, being neurodivergent in the workplace, is we're often told, you're only as valuable as you are productive. You are only as valuable as as the work output that you're able to do. And so it kind of feels at times, especially for people who haven't gone through this process before, that, asking for accommodations is something where you're like, oh please, help me, I need to appease the employer and everything like that. But really, if you really think about it, accommodations are something that benefits everyone. It is not just going to benefit you. In fact, the employer stands to benefit from giving you those supports so that you can do your job more efficiently, so that the people around you can do their job more efficiently, and everything like that. So don't forget that, accommodations are not just, a favor or some special treatment that you get. In fact, it is an employer's best interest to make sure that you are supported and make sure that you are able to do your job. What do you think of that, Denise? Like, would you have anything to add or chime in about that?
I think organizations vary, right? You may have an organization that's extremely open, right? And another organization that's extremely rigid. So I think it's, to your point, some managers may see it as a favor. I made an example in another presentation where, let's say someone works at Target. Let's say someone works at a box retailer, right? And someone works in the grocery department and the other person works in the meat department, right? Both of the people are neurodivergent. The meat department manager is open, inclusive, has a neurodivergent child, or really knows about neurodivergence, right? Versus the meat department or whatever, the other department, they don't know. They're very rigid. So although it's the same organization, the management style differs, right? Mm-hmm. So it can get really, really wonky when the organization overwhelmingly may say, okay, we have this diversity and inclusion statement, but the managers in the same organization may approach accommodations differently. Although it's a legal obligation, somehow, some way, managers seem to see it differently, right? They see it as more work. They see it sometimes as a hassle. Sometimes they see it as a favor. So it can vary depending on who your manager is and your manager's style.
Absolutely. And I think that's really where your disclosure workbook would probably come in very handy, because when we were talking about this, preparing for this presentation, Denise, we were talking a lot about how risk assessment is such a huge part about figuring out whether you should disclose at work, whether you should, request accommodations, and in what method you should do it. Because as you said, like, absolutely every organization is differently and the individuals are different as well. So, hopefully, like, we will mention the disclosure workbook later on in the presentation, but I just thought that was a really nice tie in there as well. All right, yes. Let's go on to the next question here. I'll read it out. Here it is. I don't know if I should disclose my ADHD, which is autism and ADHD, to my employer, because I've heard they could start treating me badly or fire me, but I can't carry on like this. What should I do? And it sounds like this person's in a real bind, and I think we all kind of felt that way at some point in our work lives. Denise, what are your first thoughts on this?
I think the hesitation is very valid. In today's climate, it's very valid to be hesitant. And we all know that disclosure is a huge personal decision. I would recommend, before sharing anything, what we always say, evaluate where the environment feels supportive and safe, where you can describe your needs, right? If for some reason you determine that the environment is not safe, there's other ways to accommodate yourself depending on what your job is. Like if you're in manufacturing, if you're in an office job, if you're in customer service, there are three forms of accommodation. There's a formal accommodation that goes to HR, which is a legal binding accommodation. There is an informal accommodation, which is an accommodation that is not legally binding. It's between you and your manager. And then there is self-led accommodation. That's accommodation how you kind of accommodate yourself. So when you say, this person says, hey, I can't carry on like this, that's very valid. If you decide that you want to assess the situation more and you have to, self-lead some accommodations, then you should go ahead and do that. And then secondarily, when this person says, hey, I've heard this, is it social media where you heard it? Or is it someone at your job? Did you witness someone ask for accommodations and it was a negative impact to them? I think that determines, how to perceive it. I know in the community, we hear a lot that, hey, if I disclose, it's going to cause some retaliation to me. There's a lot of risk. And we hear that in the community a lot. And I think that's 100% dependent on the organization. So I'm going to circle back and say, I would consider assessing your manager first. Before you assess the whole organization, just assess your manager. And if your manager is kind of like chill or open, I would try informal accommodation. And informal accommodation is kind of like, hey, do you think you can send me a follow-up email after our meetings? Right? It helps me get more organized with my day. And your manager may be like, sure, no problem. Although that should not have to go through a formal process, some managers will be like, oh, you have to go to HR. Why? Do you have an accommodation? Things like that. That's an informal accommodation. A self-led accommodation is depending on what you need help with, you can self-lead yourself. If you are in a manufacturing job and you need a decompression space, right? Is there a place in your office or in your warehouse that is like a little hallway where you can go decompress every 15 minutes or every, hour and a half outside of your additional breaks? Or do you need work in an office job and you need to download some type of text to speech equipment on your computer? Those are self-led accommodations that you can do for yourself without involving your manager and or HR.
Mm-hmm. And that's very poignant, I think is the word that I'm looking for, because we're often feeling like, we can only do things and change our situation if we involve management and things like that. But there are small things that we can do to kind of test the waters, so to speak, and to show that you are you are able to kind of lead your own supports and accommodations to a certain degree. So that, yeah, absolutely. And I know for anybody who doesn't know about my online Facebook group, which is where I hear most of these stories, we have almost like 78,000 neurodivergent professionals from around the world sharing their stories, sharing their struggles and everything. And oftentimes I get a sense of helplessness from a lot of people because it just feels like they're up against this big scary entity, which is not wrong. Like it can feel that way because there is some truth to that. But yeah, definitely seek out those communities, because oftentimes you'll find some very interesting coping skills, coping mechanisms, and strategies, even sharing apps and things like that might be helpful for you. Because when you're in a scenario where you're not able to fully rely on the management and things like that, then it's going to be very important to make sure that you are focusing on those self-led initiatives, just like Denise said. That's fantastic. Anything else you want to say about this one before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about when, if you're in active burnout, right? And you just can't manage to self-lead accommodations and you just don't really know what to do, because the question was, hey, I just can't keep going on like this. So that sounds to me like you may be approaching burnout or shutdown. And in that case, you may not be able to do self-led accommodations. You may have to consider taking some time off if you have it, right? If you have PTO, if you can take intermittent leave of absence. When you are in active burnout, there is no negotiating that can help, right? There is no trying to fix a system that can help. You need to rest, recoup, and relax before you can come back and take a look at it again and say, okay, now I'm ready to have this conversation, or now I'm ready to, have self-led accommodation. So I think that's something very important that we often don't talk about in the accommodations process.
Very, very well said. Perfect. Let's move on to the next one here. The question is, I freeze up in a high pressure situation, so that's why I haven't asked for accommodations yet. I feel like this process will all be for nothing if I can't advocate for myself properly. So what should I do? Yes, absolutely. Denise, why don't you take this one first? What do you think about this question?
So I think it's a normal thing, as someone who had to go through an accommodations process myself, and someone who has facilitated hundreds of accommodations. It's a normal thing. I don't think it's only neurodivergent people. I think it comes across as like a negotiation, which it shouldn't, right? It comes across as like, hey, I need these things. My doctor said I need these things. And then the organization HR is like, well, why do you need it? Tell us why. And then you go back and forth in the interactive process. So to your point, freezing up is valid, right? It all depends on how much you need an accommodation. Okay. So I've worked all my life without an accommodation, right? Obviously, I was autistic all my life with the PDA profile without an accommodation. However, my most recent workplace made it almost difficult for me to exist in this space without some sort of support, right? So it depends on if you actually need support in this particular workplace. Because we have a diagnosis doesn't necessarily mean that we need support in a particular place, right? Some workplaces, you don't need support. I never needed support before, right? And all of a sudden I need support. So I think we have to consider that I'm freezing up. Why do I need an accommodation? What part of my job that is difficult for me that I need an accommodation? Or do I just need an accommodation because I know I have a diagnosis and I need to see what I can get? So I think we need to have that conversation to say, do I need an accommodation? Have I been struggling with my job? Or I have a diagnosis and I think I should get an accommodation. Most often than not, when we're not clear, I know it's difficult. So I'm not taking away from that, okay? When we're not clear about what our needs are and how it impacts us functionally at work, right? Functionally, how it impacts the essential functions of our job, it can easily be dismissed. It should not be dismissed. The organization has a responsibility. However, it happens more often than not. So to the point of freezing up, all of that I said, I'm going to say, have the talk with yourself in the mirror. I don't know if you do, but I dance in the mirror as an autistic person. I have conversations with myself in the mirror before I have really challenging conversations, or I have conversations with myself before I have really hard conversations. So I have those conversations and I anticipate what can possibly be said. I anticipate, hey, here is what I need and why. And this is a function of the job that I need it for, right? Here is what I need. Here's why I need it. And here's the part of the job that I need it for. I know I went all around and about, but I'm going to circle it back. Here is what I need. Here is why I need it. And here's the function of the job that I need it for.
Absolutely. And you know what's interesting is I actually, when I first read this question, I kind of interpreted it as, the reason I haven't asked for accommodations yet is because I'm worried that I will freeze up when asking for accommodations, or I'm going to freeze out during that negotiation process. So, do you have any thoughts about that? How to handle that?
I do. Depending on your organization, right? If you have to go to your manager, if you have to go to HR, if you have to go to an accommodations department, send it in an email, or your organization may have an intranet, right? Where you can submit a ticket, right? So if you have the opportunity to submit a ticket and you say, hey, I have a neurodivergent condition, they probably won't know what neurodivergent is. So you'll have to say what the condition is. I have a condition and here is what I'm requesting. And I will prefer to do this over email as opposed to virtually or in person. That is also an accommodation. To engage in the interactive process in flexible ways. That is also an accommodation. So I hope that helps.
That's really great. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next question. And I just want to remind anybody who is in the audience watching right now, you are free to submit some live questions if we have some time for them at the end. I'm definitely going to try and get through as many of them as possible. Totally up to you. But in the meantime, we do have the next one here. And this one's pretty straightforward and to the point. What are the most common workplace accommodations that neurodivergent people ask for? I know the first question we were asking a little bit about, specifically for ADHD, autism, and chronic pain, but are there any other ones, Denise, that kind of come to mind that that maybe things that people might not have considered before?
Yes, there are quite a few. Obviously, remote work. So in the workbook, I have a bunch of sections around particular neurodivergent conditions. And I can say, in general, most neurodivergent conditions being dyslexia, autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, dyscalculia, is clear, explicit instructions without relying on implied messages, right? You have people in the corporate world who say corporate jargon. And if you don't subscribe to corporate jargon, you're like, what did they say? I don't really know what they said. And then you're Googling it, and then it's taking all this time to figure it out because people are just saying these random words that you never heard before. I saw a LinkedIn post and someone was like, hey, when did we start saying slide deck? Before we were saying PowerPoint presentation before. And I remember someone said a slide deck to me in 2019. It was like the CHRO. And I was like, what is that? Right. So it's just clear, explicit instructions without relying on implied meanings, predictable routines, and giving advance notice to any changes of schedules or anything like that. And then prompt communication or notification, again, of any changes that may impact your work or tasks. So if something's going to impact your work, you need advance notice. You don't want to show up to work and something has changed and all of a sudden you have to regulate your nervous system or you have to go find new directions and it just changes up your whole day. Mm-hmm. Permission to opt out of unnecessary social activities or large group meetings, a quiet space for emotional regulation, stimming if needed. Now, here's the thing about that. Most employers are kind of pushing back, but if you really think about it, there are quiet spaces for nursing mothers, right, by law. There are quiet spaces for people of Islam by law so that they can pray. So quiet spaces for people who are neurodivergent for decompression is really not an undue thing. It's not an undue hardship. It's something that can absolutely be done. Ergonomic equipment, which managers and organizations see it to be like, why do you need ergonomic equipment for a neurodivergent condition? But for most ADHD people, their energy is flexible. Right? They're really flexible with their energy. They, one time a day, they need to sit down. The other time they need to stand up and move around and get the work done and dance while they're at their desk because they need to, decompress and get that energy off. An extra time for ADHD people on assigned tasks. And extra time is not like, hey, you need more time. It's more like if I have this task that requires more processing time, right? I need more time for processing. It's not an undue hardship. It's not that I need special favors. It's just that this is how my brain processes information and I need more processing time to better understand what you need me to do. Although ADHD people process like that, right? They process really quickly. However, in a work setting, it's much different because it's very rigid. And ADHD people can't really work with the rigidness of it all. I can keep going, but I know we're on time.
Oh, no, I know that you could go on for a long time. You have a wealth of knowledge in this area here. One of the things that kind of comes to mind here is that, a lot of times people think that, accommodations are just for like people with with limitations or disabilities or things like that. But in reality, like workplace accommodations can benefit anyone. Like it's really like, in an ideal world, at least, and tell me what you think, Denise, but like in an ideal world, anybody, regardless of their neurotype, should be able to ask for accommodations so that they would be able to do their best at work. And, hopefully everybody would be able to kind of have their own, little work experience as opposed to like this one size fits all, kind of approach that, organizations seem to kind of force on us. But do you have any thoughts about that?
I'd agree that that should be a thing, but right now, accommodations, the interactive process falls under a compliance checkbox, right? Mm-hmm. So for compliance in the ADA, you have to have some kind of medical documentation, which is why I advocate and I'm working towards universal design, right? So people don't have to ask, mm-hmm. and universal design will benefit everyone, regardless of neurotype. If you think about accommodations, you think about the ADA's model was initially for the medical, physical disabled model. The ADA is so behind. It's 30 years old, but it's really behind. So the accommodations process itself may not be accessible for people who are neurodivergent, right? So you can't give a person who has a physical disability, someone who is going through cancer, right? Here is your accommodations process, right? And then someone else who has autism, who has, there's communication barriers, there's processing breakdowns, there's all of those things. You can't give them the same interactive process. It's not about, it's about equity, right? So that's kind of what universal design kind of addresses.
Perfect. And for anybody who's not familiar with the term universal design, would you mind defining it very briefly for us?
Sure. Universal design is the workplace being designed for all, regardless of neurotype, right? Universal design came about in like 1999 for architecture, designing buildings for everyone, for physically disabled people and things like that. But in the workplace, universal design means everything is accessible for everyone, regardless of neurotype, and it reduces the need for disclosure. So policies are straightforward. You know, there's a decompression space already there. The lighting is dim. There's all of these things that are already there. Meetings already have text to speech on them. Things are just already embedded, kind of like elevators, right? Kind of like Braille on the door, the office doors. Things are just already there. So that's essentially what universal design will do.
Thank you for that. That's amazing. Let's move on to the next question here. And the question is, I know I need to ask for accommodations, but I don't know where to begin. Should I send an email to HR or talk with my manager first? What is the proper way to begin the conversation? And I think you touched on this a little bit before, Denise, but feel free to expand a little bit on your thoughts there. What do you think? What do you think of this question?
I think it depends on the company structure. Again, some organizations have a ticket that you can just submit. Some organizations are very small. You just have to talk to your manager. And some organizations, there's an email where you have to email HR. I think it'll all end up with HR anyway. Everything you do will end up with HR anyway. So if you have an HR department, HR may be the best place to start. And I'm going to preface this again. I know I said it, but I'm going to preface this again. When you ask for your accommodations, remember that the accommodations are based on the essential functions of your job, why you need accommodations, and what the accommodation will help you do. So what's the functionality of it? It's important. It's very important to have that conversation in a way of, here's my job, here's my diagnosis, this is what I need and how it helps me at my job. No extra fluff or any of that, because it'll get lost in translation. You want to be direct, you want to be clear, and you want to be stern about, here are my needs, here is why I need it.
Absolutely. And just to reiterate, like, it is very for people who are not familiar with the accommodations process, it's not so much going up to management and saying, I have a problem, let's solve it together. Rather, they're going to expect that you have like a proposed solution, or you have a proposed accommodation, because in reality, while it would be lovely if they went through that journey with you and tried to help you figure things out, the reality is that they're probably not going to have they're not going to have the patience to do that. They're probably not going to have the capacity. Well, so they say, they don't have the capacity to do that. And so it's going to be very important for you to be able to be your own advocate, to know yourself as best as you can, so that you can advocate for yourself and you can make sure that you get the support that you need. Any other thoughts before we move on to the next question, Denise?
No, I agree.
Awesome. Okay, we're making good time here. And, so let's move on to the next question. We've got this one here that says, everyone keeps saying, I need to know my rights at work, but it's so overwhelming to even think about researching that. Is there an easier way so that I can protect myself at work? And it's so funny because we said this earlier in the conversation that, knowing your rights is so important, because it differs from region to region, from country to country, area to area. And it's important to kind of know that. But I don't know about you guys, but when I go on a government website, my brain kind of just like blanks out, so and I know everybody kind of has a different reaction to all of these things. Is there any advice that you have for this individual, Denise?
I do. You don't have to know every law, right? You can just take a look in the States. You can just take a look at the basics. ADA protects employees with qualifying conditions, and employers must engage in the interactive process once requested. That's essentially it, right? They must engage in the interactive process in good faith, keep a record of your communications, your decisions, and responses from management, but you don't have to know every law. I would recommend knowing your policy around it. right? The organization's policy around requesting accommodations. If they have a discrimination policy as well. But that's all you need to know is just, hey, I have a qualifying condition. I need an accommodation. The employer must engage in good faith in the accommodations, the interactive process when requested. And good faith means that it's a collaborative, engaging conversation, that they don't delay, right, on the accommodations. They work with you to come to a good solution for your needs. So they're actively working to meet your needs, and communicate with you, communicate with your doctor if need be. And that's good faith with no bias behind it or no any of that other rubbish behind it, just in good faith. That's the law in the US. That's it.
Yeah. And that's really great that you boiled it down that way, because, again, like researching law sounds like, a monumental task. And if you can remember to kind of like boil it down and focus on those points that you just mentioned, hopefully that will take some of the cognitive load off of anybody who is trying to do this. And if you check the chat, I actually did put in a link called askjan.org, which is which is called the Job Accommodation Network. I believe it is based more for US folks, but there should be a lot of resources on there for free if you would like to look over and see what kind of accommodations might be helpful to you and things like that. Yeah, that's fantastic. So let's move on to, I don't know how many more questions we have. Let's see here. Okay, we got another one. This one says, I am in customer service and I hate my job. I feel that. It's unbearable having to mask all day long, but I can't afford to lose this income. Will accommodations help me? Denise, I think we've all kind of been there when we feel trapped in a job that just, feels like a dead end, but we feel like there's nowhere to go. Any thoughts about this one?
I do. Again, I'm going to say it again. It depends on what function of your job that you need support with. So when I hear it, I hate my job. It's unbearable having to mask all day. So is it the customer interaction? Is it sensory overload? Is it the noises? You have to narrow down what it is about the job and then determine what accommodation will help you. So in the disclosure workbook, I have about 10 pages of sensory. It's a sensory checklist where by industry, right? So I have retail, I have manufacturing, I have academia, things like that. So it's based on your sensory, right? So your auditory sensory, your visual sensory, your tactile sensory, your cognitive load. So, and I think with customer service, sensory is a really important thing because you have smells of customers, you have different auditory noises, you may have beepers going off, you may have, if you're in retail or a grocery store, you have all of these different things. So I think it's important for customer service, for sure, to do a sensory check, right? To understand what will help you. If it's the customers, you may not be able to get an accommodation for the customer interaction because you're in customer service, right? So accommodations help you do your job. They don't kind of take away the essential function of your job. So that's something important to know. And so I'm going to circle back again. Sensory and customer service, understand what your sensory profile is. Once you understand what your sensory profile is, accommodations based on your job will most likely help if it's a sensory issue.
Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking as I'm hearing you talk about this, your resources that you created, the disclosure workbook and everything like that. I can't help but wish I had that resource when I was younger in my 20s, because, how often was it just a quick story time, back when I was in my 20s, I used to work in, an organization where I created a lot of career resources for students, grads, new professionals and things like that. And, what's funny is that a lot of the advice that I was finding online and a lot of the advice that I was reiterating to other people through my content didn't really make sense to me and didn't really seem like something that would help me. And so, to be able to know that there are resources out there that actually take into account the fact that people might have, different sensory profiles, the fact that people have, demand avoidance or, executive functioning challenges and things like that. And just acknowledging the experiences that we have is just really refreshing and, honestly gives me hope. I mean, like, I'm also creating that kind of content as well, but I'm so glad that you've taken the time to, take your experiences, which probably were less than ideal, and, turn it into something that would really change things for other people. So I just kind of wanted to shout that out there. Feel free to chime in if you have any other thoughts about that, Denise, but what do you think?
Very quick story time. Earlier in my career, I worked in retail. This is before I knew I was autistic. I worked in retail and I would pass out all the time, just pass out. When I worked in retail, I was a retail leader, and a lot of times we would have cashiers call in. We have people who fry chicken call in. So as a retail leader, I had to hop in. And there were times I was on the register all day or at the customer service desk all day, and I would pass out. I would be episodes, I would have cardiac events, and nobody could figure out why. I had a neurologist, I had a cardiologist, I had all the ologists, and no one could figure out why. It's important to know that sensory plays a lot on neurodivergent people. It's very important to know that, and I think that cannot be understated. We hear things around the lines of, oh, noise canceling headphones. We hear clear communication, we hear working remote, we hear all of these things, but I don't think we take into consideration how much sensory overload can happen. Have you ever gone into a grocery store? I am on the East Coast, and so we have the Wegmans, right? And you go into the grocery store and you have all these mylar balloons, you have all of these smells, you have all of this music, you have children that are coming through yelling and crying, and you have all of these different things, just all of these chatters and all of these noises, and I don't think we pay enough attention.
Oh no. It seems like there must have been a bit of a connection issue. And, I think that, while Denise finds her way back onto the call, I think that, her experience is something that we can really resonate with, being, in customer service jobs and, client facing jobs, and just being so overwhelmed with like the sensory aspect. And, in general, like as neurodivergent people, we have a lot more to deal with. Like, we're not just doing our jobs, we're also doing a second job underneath that, which is, just trying to function, trying to figure out social cues, trying to manage our sensory needs and everything like that. So that is in itself a huge job. So really, it's not about like not being able to do your job. If you really think about it, we're doing 2 jobs, we're doing 3 jobs, we're doing so much on top of, what we usually do, what others are doing. And, it's like, a lot of times they say they gave us, other people are living life playing their game on easy mode, while we've been given hard mode, and we are told that we are that everybody's been playing the same game that we've been doing. So I just want to make sure that, you know, anybody who's listening right now, you know, there is no shame in what we have to go through and what we have to ask for accommodations for and everything. So, you know, because it really makes sense when you really think about the whole thing as a whole. So hopefully Denise will be back shortly. Unfortunately, it looks like we were having some connectivity issues, and thank you for sitting through that. In the meantime, I will go on to the next question, and hopefully she'll manage to find her way back onto the call. But the question is, what kinds of accommodations would you recommend to someone with PDA and demand avoidance? And so, you know, of course, I'm hoping that our guest expert will come back soon and, you know, give us some recommendations for this. Personally, for me, I have not personally worked as a sorry, I am not somebody who is personally PDA or demand avoidant. I know that Denise said earlier in the call that she identifies with that profile there, and it looks like she is coming back online. So I really look forward to hearing what she has to say about this next question. Denise, give me a sign either in the chat or you know, come on the call and turn on your visuals once you kind of have everything sorted out on your end. But I'll just continue on with this until we kind of get things set up on that side here. Hopefully everybody appreciates that I'm stalling for time and everything. Hopefully I'm doing that all right. Let's see here. So thank you for the applause. Oh, there you are, Denise. I can hear you.
Okay, I don't know if you can see me. I can't see myself. All right. But
we have your voice and we have your expertise here. So as I mentioned just a minute ago, the question is, what kinds of accommodations would you recommend to someone with PDA and demand avoidance? And I was just saying, you probably have a lot to say about this from your own experiences, but maybe you could just give us a few thoughts about that.
Yes. I think I mentioned earlier around notification of changes. Notification of changes to any schedule is extremely important for PDA people. Anytime anything changes with the work, with the task, even if someone new is going to be on the team. I know it seems very mundane, but even if some, and then when a manager is giving you tasks, you have to know why, right? It has to make sense. So knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it and tying it to the overall organizational mission or the team's mission, that's important for someone with PDA. And that's important because I don't like to say pathological demand avoidance. It seems like, you know, you're just folding your hands and saying, no, I don't want to do it. And with pathological demand avoidance, it's more of a nervous system response, right? Like your brain is like, okay, are we fighting? Are we freezing? Or are we fawning? Right? What is happening here? Why don't I know what's happening? What is going on? And then it's a whole nervous response thing. So I think knowing what's going to happen when it happens, being looped in to understand what's going to happen. So an example would be the organization is downsizing, right? Or the organization is moving your team to another team. The accommodation would simply say advance notice as soon as possible, right, of changes. And so the company would say, well, the most we can do is 48 hours, right, depending on the change. So sometimes a company only has so much that they can do depending on the change. They may not know about the change until 24, your manager may not know until 24 hours before the change. So as soon as possible means as soon as your manager knows, right, you also need to know. So some things about neurodivergent and PDA accommodations are kind of a nuance and they're not very straightforward. Right. And someone with a PDA profile, you would think these are regular, everyday, run-of-the-mill things that should happen in the workplace. But unfortunately, you may have to ask for accommodation just to say, hey, tell me what's going to happen that's going to affect my job.
That's very helpful for sure. And somebody just mentioned in the chat as well, because we were talking about alternatives for saying demand avoidance, they were saying that it's also called persistent demand for autonomy.
It is. Yep, it is. Thank you.
Perfect. Yes. And that's really good to know, because of course, like, there is a lot of stigma that comes with these kinds of labels and these kinds of ways that we kind of speak about it. And so it's really great that you kind of destigmatize it by saying, it's not a personality flaw. It's not something that, you're trying to do. It's a nervous system response. It is literally a physiological response to what is happening in your surroundings. And your body is really just trying to protect itself at the end of the day. It is trying to protect you from danger. And, it just so happens that we don't live in the wilds. We live in, we work in structured work environments and sometimes, it's really hard to, go to work and be like, okay, nervous system, this isn't a fight or flight situation. This is literally me sending an email. And it's really frustrating when your body doesn't really quite get the message.
But hear me out. It's literally just saying an email, but the response that you may get to the email, right? So have you ever had to send an email that you were kind of dreading? You were reading it over. You were like, no, that's not right. How should it sound coming out? So that's where it comes in. While it may just seem like an email. So the pathological, the PDA, your body doesn't know that it's just an email, right? Your body is like, what is going to happen with this? And if I can do, we're 6 minutes, so I'll stop.
All good. It's all good, but that's really, really helpful. Thank you so much for that context. And you know what? We're just coming up to the end of our time, and I do want to take a moment here to acknowledge some of the amazing work that Denise is doing. Her business is called Inclusion by Design, as you can see there. I'd love for you, Denise, to take a minute and tell us a little bit about this special promotion you have for our office hours attendees, as well as the Safe Score framework, both of which we have mentioned throughout this presentation. So why don't you go ahead with that?
Sure. So the disclosure workbook, the paperback version, is on sale for 35% off. If for this crowd only, if you use office hours as a coupon code, all caps, 2 words, office hours as a coupon code. The disclosure workbook is 35% off, and that is for the entire weekend. So Monday will go back to full price, but this weekend is 35% off. And as far as Inclusion by Design, it is a small business consultancy. And here in the Metro DC area, we're starting with small businesses. The idea is to embed neuro inclusion as a universal design, the Safe Score framework as a universal design across organizations. The Safe Score framework stands for safety, accessibility, freedom, and equity. So what we do is we measure policies, procedures, leadership development, the talent life cycle, recruiting. We measure all of that through this framework. And the disclosure workbook, it uses the framework for a diagnostic tool. So for neurodivergent people, the framework is used for a diagnostic tool to diagnose your organization. You can use it for any diagnostic tool. You can use it for your organization. You can use it for your kids' organization. You can use it for your church. You can use it for your school. You can use it for wherever you want to use it. But in an organizational context, it's kind of a metric, and an audit, and an account tool. So we merge both. We help employees, right, with strategy, accommodation, align with the Safe Score framework, and then we help organizations kind of become more neuro inclusive around universal design.
That's fantastic. And I'm just dropping the links in the chat here just in case. And Denise, can you just take a look at what I wrote in the chat and just make sure that the code that I put in there, office hours, is correct? Sorry. But that being said, you can follow those links there. It's just in the chat at the bottom right-hand corner. It's just all caps office hours, right? That's the code.
Yes, my computer's going slow. It's 2 words, office hours, all caps.
Oh,
I
okay,
can't see
for
my
sure.
computer.
So no
Yes.
worries, no worries. I know that, technology gets quite finicky, especially when we need it most. So no worries. Thank you so much for that. And I hope everybody checks that out. As for me, I'm doing my own work here. A lot of you may know me from the Neurodivergent Careers and Job Hunting online support community on Facebook. We are 78,000 members strong, neurodivergent professionals from around the world. Really great conversations, really important conversations that we're having there around what it's like to be neurodivergent in the workplace. You'll be surprised to see that, even though this is a global group, a lot of the themes are the same for all of us, wherever we are across the globe. So definitely check that out. It is one of my free resources. I do have a team that moderates and curates the space there. So that's something I'm very proud of that I'd love to share with you. Yes, sorry about that. I'm running out of voice here. The other thing that I wanted to mention is my new online course, which is called Misfit to Master Plan: How to Create Your Neurodivergent Friendly Career Strategy. And the first thing that I wanted to kind of share with you is my freebie, which I'm basically offering the first lesson of my course for free. So I've just popped the link in there into the chat there. I think that's the right one. Oh wait, no, that's a completely different resource actually, but feel free to enjoy that. That's the last one that I had sent out. Let me actually just relink this is my a link to my online course where you can find and access the first lesson, which is about the neurodivergent employment burnout cycle, which is something that we actually talked a lot about how burnout and where you are in the burnout cycle can really impact the choices that you need to make regarding accommodations, disclosure, and how to move forward in your workplace. So I hope that that will be something that is really useful for you guys. I'll also pop in the chat the link to the Facebook group because I forgot to do that. And with that, that brings us to the end of our time. So I want to just say again, thank you, a huge thank you to Denise for sharing her expertise, her knowledge, and her time with us today. I'm Veronica Yao once again. I hope that we'll see you all online in our little neurodivergent community. We all need to continue supporting one another. Any last words that you would like to say before we wrap up today, Denise? Oh, I'm not getting the sound coming through from you, unfortunately. I wonder if anybody else can hear, but unfortunately, I'm not hearing any sound. But I'm sure you're saying good things on your end, and I want to, and once again, thank you so much for being here. And I'm sure that we'll be able to follow you online. Be sure to check out Inclusion by
No, we're
Design,
at time, and I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. I do see the last question I wasn't able to answer, but I just want to be cognizant of everyone's time.
No worries, no worries. And sorry about that. It looks like we're having a bit of a latency or lag issue here. But anyway, thank you so much again for being here. Your expertise is so needed and appreciated here. And thank you everybody for joining. Yes, there we go. So thank you everybody. And I'm going to stop the recording now, and we'll see you at the next office hours, hopefully. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.